Hi everyone and welcome to today's English homework help. Last week we talked about compound sentences and how they can make our writing more interesting, and today we're going to start learning about complex sentences and specifically the importance of understanding the difference between dependent and independent clauses. So let's get into it. Okay, so here's the definition of each of them. You can read it on the screen, but basically an independent clause stands alone by itself and makes sense on its own. So it's a complete sentence, or it could be a complete sentence on its own. It's often what we would call a simple sentence. So it's just got an idea, but it's fully complete and you're not left wondering or asking questions about what would make the sentence make sense. In contrast, a dependent clause doesn't make sense on its own. It adds information which can be added to an independent clause, so you can put the two together, but the dependent clause depends upon the independent clause to give it meaning. Now, sometimes I see students writing independent clauses and punctuating them well, and sometimes I see students writing dependent clauses and punctuating them as if they are independent clauses. What we want to do is put both of them together to create more interesting sentences overall, creating complex sentences. And we'll talk about the punctuation for those in future weeks. But first, we need to understand what the clauses look like in practice. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. Okay, so here's an example of an independent clause. The rain fell heavily. It makes sense on its own. It hasn't got heaps of detail, but it's got a subject, the rain. It's got the verb, it fell, and it even tells us how it fell. It's got that adverb there, heavily. So a dependent clause underneath that would be something like, as the storm approached. And if you think like I do, when somebody says a dependent clause like that, I'm left thinking, yeah, as the storm approached, yeah, what happened, right? There's a question there. I don't know what that sentence means because I haven't got the main idea. I've got some supporting information, but I don't have the main idea. But if I put the two together, as the storm approached, the rain fell heavily. Now that dependent clause has added more information to the independent clause and made a more interesting and informative sentence. The way that I've done that, though, is by putting the two together. Okay, so we can't have that dependent clause on its own. It doesn't form a complete sentence. And the independent clause, which did form a complete sentence, now has more context around it because we know that it was happening as the storm approached. So together, they make each other stronger. Here are some examples I'd like you to run through and think about whether you think these are dependent or independent clauses. The child ran across the street. Who stayed at home today? Wherever I go, I feel excited that she knew the answer. Where the plants are growing? How often do you go? Okay. So the child ran across the street is an independent clause. It makes sense on its own. Who stayed at home today? Dependent. We don't know what that relates to. We need some more information. Wherever I go, dependent. Wherever I go, something happens. We'd find out what that was in the independent clause. I feel excited. It's a short sentence, but it's actually independent. It makes sense all by itself. That she knew the answer, dependent. Where the plants are growing, dependent. If you had something like in the garden where the plants are growing, that would be independent. And how often do you go? It's a complete question, and that is an independent sentence. So we haven't talked too much about punctuation today, but having a question mark at the end of an independent clause still makes it an independent clause. It's just a question. That's the form of the sentence. Okay, if you add dependent clauses to your independent clauses, to your simple sentences, you can create complex sentences. And last week we talked about how good writing incorporates some simple sentences, some complex sentences, and some compound sentences. And now we've learnt about all three of them. you can start practicing varying your writing. And you can run a bit of a scan over your first draft and see whether you've used some interesting variety in your writing. Okay, guys, I hope that's helpful. Go and write some complex sentences. And if you have questions about this or you'd like more help, please let me know by email or by comment on one of the videos. Don't forget to subscribe so that you are notified when new videos go up. I might be answering your question. And if you hit the notifications bell, you will be notified when things go up. You won't have to come searching for it. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you on Sunday for trivia. Bye.